For more on the confirmation hearings for President-elect Trump for Jeff Sessions, we are joined by two guests. From the Cannon Rotunda on Capitol Hill, we're joined by Congressman Luis Gutiérrez, Democrat of Illinois, a member of the Judiciary Committee and the co-chair of the Immigration Task Force of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. He just released a statement saying why I will not be at inauguration and will be marching with women. Also with us is Reverend Dr. William Barber, president of the North Carolina NAACP and Tomorrow Monday's leader. On Monday, he led about 500 demonstrators to the Russell Senate office building, where they marched through the marble hallways and delivered an anti-Sessions petition to the offices of Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and others. Reverend Barber is the author of Third Reconstruction, Tomorrow Monday's Fusion Politics and the Rise of a New Justice Movement. Welcome, both of you, to Democracy Now!, both of you back to the show. Reverend Barber, I'd like to ask you about the protest you led against Jeff Sessions and your response now that you've heard some of his testimony yesterday at the Senate.
Well, first of all, Juan and Amy, thank you so much for having us. Repairers of the breach, along with Faith in Public Life, with my good friend Reverend Jennifer Butler, and 500 clergy and impacted persons. We led a Tomorrow Monday march to McConnell's office, Senate Leader McConnell, asking him and all of the other senators to reject the Sessions nomination. This was the first time we understand that clergy have done this at this period. We really believe it's a moral crisis, and there's so much camouflaging that we have to get underneath so that we can get to the truth. First of all, when we talk about Jeff Sessions, they say, well, he's a Methodist. Well, so was George Wallace. They say, well, he's cordial. Well, Southern cordiality and racial animosity are two different things altogether. They say that he's been respectful. Well, you can be respectful. Jesse Helms had certain levels of respect, but he was very racist in his policies. What we look at now is where Sessions has stood on the issues. And let me point out what I mean by that. First of all, he has shown a contempt for the 15th Amendment of the Constitution, which says the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged. And then Section 2 says the Congress shall have the power to enforce this article. For 1,296 days, Senator Sessions has been a part of the group that has kept the Congress from enforcing the 15th Amendment by fixing Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act. He has a contempt for the 15th Amendment. He has called the Voting Rights Act an intrusive piece of legislation. That is the legislation that people died for. He says it is intrusive. In other words, it's a bother. He has stood against voting rights. He has applauded the Shelby decision, which gutted the Voting Rights Act, and has done nothing in the Congress to fix it. Even on yesterday, he said he did not know anything about the biggest voter suppression case in the country right now, the NAACP versus McCrory, where the court said that North Carolina engaged in intentional racial discrimination, things they could not have done if Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act was enforced. So here's the question for America. If Sessions has a contempt for the 15th Amendment as a senator, if he has tried to undermine the 15th Amendment as a senator, then why would you want him to be the Attorney General who is required to enforce the 15th Amendment? That's the kind of racism that we're talking about. Racism in America is not just about a white supremacist yelling the N-word or wearing robes or burning crosses. Racism is perpetrated through systems of power that consistently privilege white people while discriminating against people of color and other Americans. And when you look at his record on this, he has a contempt for the 15th Amendment for the protection of voting rights and has applauded false claims about voter fraud and real realities of voter suppression that is greater than things we've seen since the days of Jim Crow.
Well, Representative Luis Gutiérrez of Chicago, Today, we're going to see one of your colleagues in the House, John Lewis, as well as Senator Cory Booker, making a historic first ever testimony by a senator against one of his colleagues on a presidential nomination. Your concerns about Jeff Sessions and your reaction to his testimony yesterday?
Well, I have a grave concern. I have a grave concern beginning with his xenophobic, anti-immigrant rhetoric and positions with the most extreme sectors, not only in the Senate, but across this country. I'm worried about 750,000 young men and women who have achieved legality in this country through President Obama's executive order, which he will threaten. He can easily threaten them. He can revoke that as the Attorney General. Simply somebody sues and he says, I agree, which is exactly his attitude. He doesn't believe in immigration. He'll say, well, I just want to take care of the illegal immigrants. No, he doesn't believe in immigration, period. So as a man born in 1953, when separate but equal was the law of the land, when I was born, I see in Jeff Sessions a man who wants black people to be quiet, immigrants to be silent and invisible, women back in the kitchen and gays in the closet. And there is a particular statement of the senator and a position to back up. So if that's the America you want to make great again, then Jeff Sessions is your guy. And so I'm very concerned about the progress that we have made, especially as the Reverend has talked about the Voting Rights Act. Look, Juan, you and I would not be having this conversation. I would not have been elected to the Congress of the United States had it not been for the brave men and women in America leading the civil rights movement that gave us a Civil Rights Act, a Voting Rights Act, which finally allowed me to be in Congress. And I'm going to raise my voice because that is the tradition that I feel a responsibility to and a debt to. Latinos get to speak today because black people were murdered and lynched and their churches were burned and others became allies of theirs in a great civil rights movement. And we cannot simply turn our backs on that history, that great history of our nation.
I wanted to go to the letter that was just released of Coretta Scott King. On Tuesday, the Washington Post published a 9-page letter written by King in 1986 opposing Jeff Sessions' nomination to a federal judgeship. You know, this is very significant, nominated by Reagan. Ultimately, the Senate Judiciary Committee, it would only be Sessions, and I think over the past 50 years from that point, one other person had not been approved by the Senate Judiciary Committee for a judgeship. According to BuzzFeed News, which first reported the letter's existence, it was never entered in the congressional record by then Judiciary Committee Chair Strom Thurmond. King's opposition, however, proved critical to the argument against Sessions' confirmation. In the letter, she cites Sessions' attempted prosecution of 3 black civil rights workers in Marion, Alabama, for voter fraud. Coretta Scott King writes, when the circumstances and facts are analyzed, it becomes clear the motivation was political, the result frightening, the wide-scale chill of the exercise of the ballot for blacks who suffered so much to receive that right in the first place. Therefore, it's my strongly held view that the appointment of Jefferson Sessions to the federal bench would irreparably damage the work of my husband. King also writes, the irony of Mr. Sessions' nomination is that if confirmed, he will be given a life tenure for doing with a federal prosecution what the local sheriffs accomplished 20 years ago with clubs and cattle prods. I believe that his confirmation would have a devastating effect on not only the judicial system in Alabama, but also on the progress we've made toward fulfilling my husband's dream. Again, that a letter that Strom Thurmond did not enter into the congressional record, but that Coretta Scott King wrote opposing Sessions' U.S. attorney, judgeship, rather, nomination in 1986. I'm sure you know the case, Reverend Barber of the Marion Three very well, close allies of Dr. King, the Turners, gone after by the U.S. attorney at the time, Jeff Sessions, in Alabama. Ultimately, they were acquitted.
I do, and there's several things that were so striking and hypocritical at that hearing yesterday. You know, when Senator Sessions said, he denounced the Klan. Those are kind of common phrases to say, I did this. He said he didn't call the NAACP un-American. Basically, he's saying, I did these things. You all heard it, but you didn't really hear what you heard or see what you saw. In essence, he's calling Coretta Scott King a liar. He's saying the NAACP and our people are liars. He's even saying that Ms. Turner is a liar. She's still alive. And just the other day, she says, I know Jeff Sessions. The leopard has not changed his spot. She said that he tried to put her and her husband in jail for 250 years. That's the same length of time that black people were enslaved in this country. And it was all over a fraudulent case. He claims to have worked on cases, but there's a Washington Post article that says he really didn't work on those cases. So what we have here is someone who has a clear record. He has a record in the past. He never repented of it. Now, he may say he may suggest that they weren't his ideas, but he's never repented of it and become an advocate for voting rights and a staunch supporter of the 15th Amendment. If anything, he has hardened over the years and become more shrewd over the years. I keep saying this constantly, Amy, to people. This Congress, for 1,296 days today, has refused to do its job. In essence, you've had what Dr. King called interposition and nullification in the Congress, refusing to fix the 15th Amendment. That in itself alone should be a disqualifier for someone who's being asked to lead the U.S. Attorney General's office. However, there's something else. Senator Sessions has stood against a legislation that would help vulnerable Muslim Americans, that would help the LGBT community. He has voted against immigrant rights and the rights of refugees. He has even voted against the Women's Act, Violence Against Women's Act, and he voted against a program that would help minorities, African Americans, and women have access to federal contracts, which means he's not only in contempt, he has a contempt for the 15th Amendment, he has a contempt for the 14th Amendment, which, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which says you cannot discriminate in any programs that receive federal money. So he has a contempt for the 15th Amendment. He has shown contempt for the 14th Amendment, which says equal protection under the law should be provided to all people regardless of their race, their color, their creed, their sexuality. He's shown a contempt for the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Title VI. So someone who has shown a contempt for these things cannot be put in office to be the law enforcement officer over these things. It's like putting the fox in charge of the hen house.
Luis,
Amy, I mean, I'd like to just put it in a little bit of a personal perspective. So the America that my daughters live in is a different America than the one that their mom and their grandmother. He wants to take Roe versus Wade and eliminate it. When you take the totality of the man, let's remember, when they say they want to make America great again, they want to go back to a time in which women and gays and Latinos were simply quiet and shut out of the process. And as the Reverend has so articulately presented, it is very clear that and let me just say this so that we're clear, when Donald Trump called for a ban and a registry on Muslim, he was the first one to stand up, the first senator and the first member of the Republican Party to stand up, support, and applaud and endorse Donald Trump for president of the United States. So he can say what he wants today, but I think we should judge him on his actions of yesterday.
Well,